I was floored looking through these project photos because all of them look incredible. Like they all fit perfectly. Hi, hello, my name is Ali. I'm a graphic designer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me. And today that means spring knitting plans because I have wrapped up my winter knitting, if you cannot tell from the finished object that I'm currently wearing that we're going to chat more about in a minute. And also before getting into what my spring knitting plans actually are, I want to kind of do a recap of what my winter knitting plans were going into the winter versus what I actually ended up doing, because I think it's always fun to do a little bit of review. And then before we get into the finished object at the end, I also want to tell you a bit about my new current whip that is one of these new spring knitting plans that I've now started. As for my mug and tea of the day, today I'm drinking out of my tulip mug that I just pulled out of storage because it's part of my spring collection that I put away for the rest of the year. And it felt like the day to bring it out because A, it's a very springy mug, spring knitting plans, but also can we discuss how perfectly it matches my Colette Pullover? So it just felt like the time. It is spring has sprung, the spring mug has sprung from the basement box. And today out of my tulip mug, I'm drinking my usual Sloan Classic Earl Grey. We have not branched out today. Now, as for what I'm wearing, of course, like I said, this is my Colette Pullover, but we're going to chat about this one more at the end of the video after the spring knitting plans to wrap up the journey of the Colette Pullover on the channel. Okay, so to recap the winter knitting plans, the things that were sort of the concrete objectives of my winter knitting plans were to finish the new cardigan that I was making my sister for Christmas, which check, 100% definitely did this, and did it in time for Christmas, which was looking extremely dubious for most of the process. So A+ on getting that one done, A+++, impressed myself. Next thing on my winter knitting plans was my Colette, which as you can see, we did. So check, we're 2 for 2 so far, which, is looking promising so far, actually sticking to plans. I think that part of that in these cases is that, A, the menu was already started when I made the plan to finish it. So me being a relatively monogamous knitter, it was unlikely that that one wasn't gonna get done. And then I also already had part of the yarn for this project. I later realized I needed to add a second strand with it, but here, we had a financial investment in the project. It was a serious project. It was ready to go. It was likely that this one was going to happen, and it did. Now, the one solid goal of my winter knitting plans that did not actually transpire is my serendipity sweater. And this is technically because I ended up knitting something else, but really I'm going to blame it on the Colette because, reminder, flashback, when I started this, I was having issues with my gauge, to get the gauge to match the stitch count it was supposed to. It was looking much more open than I liked in the yarn that I'd chosen, so it started this whole saga of having to go look for something else to hold it with. It was a whole thing, and in the meantime, I was like, I'm annoyed. I just knit a million cables in my menu. Now I'm planning to knit more cables on this Colette and it's being annoying. And you know what? I would just love a quick win. And so I decided to cast on, completely out of nowhere, not in my knitting plans, a Leon sweater. So that is what I ended up knitting instead of the serendipity sweater this winter, because by the time I finished that and then I worked on my Colette, it's spring. So we've run out of winter for the serendipity, but I have not yet let go of the idea of the serendipity. It is still in the works. It is still coming, just not winter 2024, 2025. So that's where we're at, coming out of winter and into spring. That's sort of the state of the union as far as Ali's knitting world and what's going on in it. So let's get into now what I'm thinking about for my spring knitting plans. Okay, so the first thing that I'm thinking of knitting for spring is the Essential blanket from Unraveled. And so this portion of the video and this project are actually sponsored by Unraveled. So Unraveled is a small family-run business that sells kits for knitting projects that range from very, very beginner to more advanced projects. And they give you everything that you need to get a project done in one box, and that can be with or without needles, depending on whether you already have what you need. And a real focus for Unraveled, and what I really like about their concept, is that they're really about the sort of therapeutic and mindfulness aspects of knitting. So their kits are really geared toward things that are very sort of calming and meditative to work on. Coming out of those winter knitting plans, I've been doing so much cabling lately. I'm just ready for something that's just so simple. It's also knit up on 5.5mm needles, which is bigger than I'm used to working on lately, so I think it would feel like it's really flying by in a really satisfying way. And I think this is one that I am not going to aim to sort of start and finish in quick succession, before starting anything else, the way that I do with most projects. I'm envisioning this blanket to be something that will just sort of be on my needles in the background. So when I hit, say, a part of my next complicated garment that really requires a lot of brain power, but it's the night of the Bachelor finale and I don't want to miss half the show trying to follow detailed instructions, it's something that will just be there ready for me to pick up easily when I need something. And I think it'll be really nice to have something that sort of fills that role when I am just at an awkward part of a more elaborate project. So I think it'll be really nice to have something that's just sort of simple and, I was gonna say mindless, but mindful in this way, where I can just be doing it with this ease and this calm, and I think that'll be really nice. Like I said, this is the Essential blanket by Unraveled. You can get kits for either 85 by 105 centimeters or 100 by 140 if you want a bigger one. The pattern and the yarn come together in the kit. The yarn that you get is called Unraveled Uno. This one is 60% alpaca, 30% merino wool, and 10% poly. So I'm knitting this in the calm colorway, but there are other colorway options too if you're looking for something different. So the cost of this kit that gets you the pattern and the yarn for the smaller version of this blanket costs $171 or $244 Canadian or $296 Australian dollars, because that's actually where they're based. So if you're interested in knitting the Essential blanket along with me this spring, I do have a discount code. So if you go to unraveled.store and use the coupon code AllieMakesEverything, that'll get you 10% off your order. So if this sounds fun to you, I hope you'll join me. Okay, so the next thing on my spring knitting plans list, and this one is like a very concrete plan, like this one is definitely happening, is the Tucker by Alicia Plummer. So this is a really nice, like lightweight long sleeve tee that I think is just, I feel a really logical place in my wardrobe for knitting to fill, that I don't currently have anything in that area. And I think part of that is that there's something a little bit intimidating about knitting something that is long sleeve at this small of a gauge, because it's not going to be super duper quick, but it's also plain stockinette, so that will help. So this pattern is written as a sport weight, but sport weight is just like a very awkward weight of yarn. Like I don't find that option available a lot outside the realm of like sock yarn, which tends to have nylon in it, which is not what I want for a long sleeve tee. And I kind of already had in mind what I wanted to do with this yarn wise. So I'm actually going to be knitting this out of a fingering weight yarn, but knitting a size up. And if that sounds alarming, if you have been watching my channel and know the gauge debacle that I had with my Colette, where I was trying to follow this pattern with a smaller yarn than recommended, we know I'm a tight knitter. That doesn't usually go well for me. Why would I do that? But here's why I think, knock on wood, this is an acceptable idea in this case. So my Tekla top that I made last summer is knit out of the exact base of yarn that I'm going to be using for my Tucker. And the gauge of that is the exact same gauge as the gauge for this project. I had to use slightly larger needles to get it, but that's normal to me. And I'm really happy with how that fabric turned out. Like I don't find it too open. I find it really nice and cozy and drapey. And I think that will be perfect for my Tucker. So this is a pattern that's size inclusive up to between a 72 to a 74 inch bust, depending on how much of the intended positive ease that you want, which fantastic. It makes me so happy to see patterns that really go above and beyond the sort of like 60-inch benchmark that we tend to use to demarcate whether something is size inclusive or not. So just love. And this pattern is $9 US. So as far as construction, this is knit top down in the round as a raglan. And this is going to be just like a little vacation to Stockinette Island. I mean, like I said, I've been doing so many cables. You'll see in a moment. I have plans of color work coming up. So I'm loving the idea of something that is just simple, but should also be a very good, just sort of staple base item in my wardrobe that fills a role that none of my current knits really have. Like I've done sweaters and I've done tank tops, but I really haven't done anything in between. And the closest that I tried to do in between was my Colette when I originally started it with like a cotton linen blend. But as we know, that's not how it worked out in the end. So here we go again. We're trying. A lighter weight, a long sleeve knit that I can hopefully wear through the spring and into summer in the sort of like chilly evening, like as a layering option kind of situation. So that's the vision for the Tucker. And I mentioned color work, so that comes in with this next plan, which welcome back to the serendipity. It's still here, it's still the plan. It's just gotten bumped from winter into spring because I simply ran out of time. But I do really want to knit this. Also a part of it, like there may be a world where I started this instead of the Lyon sweater, except that I hadn't yet received the yarn for it. It was a special order. It took many weeks, but it's finally here. I finally have it, and I am really both excited and apprehensive to cast this on, but I think apprehensive in the way where like I kind of want to get it over with so that I know if it's going to be an issue or not, because I've never done stranded color work before, and I'm a tight knitter, which I have been told can result in some tension issues with color work, that you can be really prone to having floats that are too tight and then creating like puckering in your color work. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, but there's only one way to find out. So I would just like to find out. And I've done color work in the past using Intarsia, and there's just something that I find kind of fun in a sort of like paint by numbery kind of way about following a color chart when knitting. So I'm excited to dive into this one, if, as I said, slightly apprehensive. So maybe if you are a tight knitter and you have recommendations for what has helped you to keep your floats like at the correct tension, let me know. I would love to hear some words of wisdom from people who are coming from the same like problem set that I am. But anyway, so the Serendipity is a pattern by Knitting for Breakfast. This pattern accommodates up to between a 62 to a 66 inch bust, which again, that's pretty good. We love to see that. This pattern costs $5.50 in euros or about $8.50 Canadian. And this is a DK weight project that's knit top down in the round in a circular yoke construction. So the other reason that I'm really excited to cast this one on is because I am dying to use the yarns that I've acquired for this. One moment. So I've shown these on the channel before. If you've been here before, this will not be new to you, but the main color for my sweater is going to be this very natural, undyed, 100% raw meat wool in this dark gray brown color. This is from Shelterwood Fiber Co. I have 4 of these, which I picked up in the fall when I was visiting Vancouver, and this is a local BC yarn, so that was really fun to me. And then the ones that I was waiting on are these from La Bien-Aimée. So these are going to be my contrast colors. This is the Merino DK base, which I'm just realizing now, I don't think I realized is a superwash, so I'm gonna maybe need to make sure I'm not gonna have weird growing, but like if it's just a contrast color, I presumably don't need to worry a lot about growth. Hopefully, I guess I need to do a swatch and make sure that this actually like is compatible with this, because this is definitely not superwash, but that's fine, right? Anyway, so this one is the colorway Inko. This is from the La Bien-Aimée anime collection. This is why I had to do a special order. I was having a really hard time tracking this down. And this is the same base in the colorway Winter. And I just am obsessed with what this looks like. And so when La Bien-Aimée released this color, I remember looking at it on their Instagram and thinking that skein is the most fun, most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But I have this problem a lot with variegated yarns where like I love what it looks like in a skein. And then I went hunting to try to find some pictures of it knit up. And when I eventually found some, I was like, I just don't know if that's not true. I know that I won't like that in a garment as like an all over thing. Like just know thyself, love the skein, not the garment. But I kept seeing it on Instagram as a skein and I kept like coveting it and like obsessing over it. And this was at the same time that I was trying to figure out what color I might want to combine with this to do the Serendipity sweater. And I was having a really hard time coming up with a solid color that I liked the idea of combining with this, because I didn't just want to go neutral, but I also felt like something in like the warmth of this gray / the coolness of this brown, I felt like it did kind of a weird like 70s thing to kind of any color that I paired with it. They just all felt a little off, or at the very least like not me, you know? Like I could see combinations that I'm like, I could see that on another person and that I would think that was a nice sweater, but it just doesn't feel like a sweater that I want, despite the fact that I love this on its own. And like, I could imagine knitting myself a whole sweater out of this and liking it, but I just wanted to use it in something a little more interesting than that, but was really struggling to figure out what that was. And so at the same time, I'm seeing this on Instagram constantly and being like, oh my God, is there something I can do with that I will like? And these two ideas came together in my head and I went, maybe I would actually really like how this looks as a contrast color in a color work, so you're not getting the like all over sort of variegated effect. This is very much not a perfect science, and I might hate how it looks. That is a possibility. There's a possibility I will start this project and I will end up frogging it because I will hate it and I'll have to come up with something else to do with this, and something where maybe it's okay that I don't super love how it knits up. We will see. But I just was so obsessed with it and having such a hard time finding a pairing for this that I was like, I feel like I have to try putting these together and see if that is the magic solution to my problems, and I'm hoping that it is. And this will just be a nice like neutral secondary contrast color to bring it all together. I believe that the pattern actually calls for 3 contrast colors, but I decided to modify the chart so that it's only using 3 colors, just to like streamline things a little, since one of my colors is so like kind of chaotic and all over the place. So between the different yarns that I bought for this project, I paid $117 Canadian for that base color at Bad Anna's in Vancouver. And then I paid $77 US or another $110 Canadian to get those 2 skeins of La Bien-Aimée that I ordered from Wool & Co. So we're looking at a total project cost of $227 Canadian or $157 US. Okay, so the next thing that I'm thinking about knitting this spring, and this is one that I really would like to knit, but I'm not sure if I might just run out of time between the other things already on my list. But I would really like to try knitting a t-shirt. And this is one that is kind of a surprise to me because I've previously had no interest in that, and in fact actually kind of negative interest. Like I was kind of feeling like that's just sort of a weird type of garment to be made out of a knit to me, and what is the correct weather when you wear that, and I was just sort of very like question mark about it. And then I saw Amy of Knee Knits knit the My Favorite Things Knitwear tee #1, and I was like, oh, I love this. Like, there's something about that very sort of dramatic structured sleeve on it that I was like, I want it. Like, I just fell in love with this idea. And so I went looking at patterns because as much as I am obsessed with the way that Amy's looks, some of them My Favorite Things Knitwear patterns don't go up as far as I would like for them to in the size range. But so I went looking for another option that would share this idea of the dramatic sleeve, and I think I found the perfect contender. So this is the All Good tee. This is by Magdalena Parker. So in terms of size inclusivity, this one accommodates up to a 59-inch bust. It's not like this one is above and beyond, but it does accommodate a few more inches than the My Favorite Things Knitwear one, which was up to 55 inches. So this pattern costs $9 US, and it is, I believe, a drop shoulder construction, so you're knitting it in the round. Again, stockinette. There's a lot of stockinette in these plans. Did I overcorrect from my winter knitting? Like, if this fall and winter was all cable and color work, which I realized was a mistake, and had to take a break with the Lyon, have I gone too far the other direction? We will see. But I just love the shoulder and sleeve on the shirt. I can't not have it here. Now, I don't currently have yarn that I'm planning to knit this out of. That's something that I will need to figure out when it comes time to knit this. But this is a fingering weight knit. I'm thinking of knitting it out of Sainisgarn Sunday. Now, I think the pattern recommends either a fingering weight merino or some sort of like cotton linen blend or something. But I think when I was looking at the photos, I think I saw that the samples that I really loved were the ones that were knit out of merino. I think just the qualities of fabric that you get from one versus the other kind of give you different levels of like structure or drapiness. And I just really love the structure of that sleeve. So it's gonna have to be merino to get me as close to those sample photos as I can. And typically my go-to for a fingering weight merino is the Knitting for Olive, but I'm feeling like I've kind of exhausted the colorways from them that I really love the most, and can definitely imagine using them in projects where I'm combining different colors. But right now I don't feel like I need another solid color garment in any of the colors that they currently have to offer me. Like, I would just be inclined to pick a color I've already knit with from them, which just seems boring. The one that I was considering was petroleum green. I feel like in some of the photos online, I adore it. It looks like this really rich, deep, oceany, greeny blue. But then when I was looking at project photos on Ravelry, I found that it seemed to have more of like a white base behind it than I wanted. Like, it didn't have that like depth and richness. It looked kind of washed out, and that's just not the version of that color that I know I would really love. So I was looking instead at Sainisgarn Sunday, which I did use as part of my Magnolia Bloom sweater. So I'm not a total stranger to it, but I also haven't used it a lot. And so looking at its color range was fun because I'm not very familiar with it. And I was like, oh, okay, there are some options here that are different from the Knitting for Olive ones. So I'm thinking about, I think, two main options for this in terms of color, one being like a royal blue and one being a red. But I think I need to make a visit to the knitting loft so I can see these in person, especially the red, because I'm hoping based on the photos online that it's a little more of a neutral to orangey red. If it's a super bluey red, I don't think it'll be quite what I want, but I think I need to just go like see in person what these colors actually look like and pick which one I want to have a t-shirt in. Which sounds fun. Now, when I was looking through Ravelry at options for knit t-shirt patterns, of course, I found lots of things that were not similar to what I was looking for, right? You can only filter things so specifically. And in that searching, I came across a pattern that is not what I think I'm looking for this time around with t-shirts, but that I did really like. And I think that My Favorite Things Knitwear pattern has sort of unlocked something in my brain as far as like being open to knit t-shirts in a way that I was previously very closed off to. And this pattern, the Tumble Tee by Lydia Morrow, I was just floored by looking through project photos from different people and how amazing it looked on everybody. Like, I find with most patterns, there's a range, right? Like, there's some where theirs came out very similar to the sample photos, the fit looks just right. And then there's others where you're like, did you do a weird thing here? Or like, did this pattern super not like deliver the way we were expecting? Like, did you pick a weird fiber? Did you do weird things with your sizing? Did you just make a very different sizing choice than the pattern recommended? I tend to be looking at project photos trying to figure out what went wrong in some of these, and are those things that are likely to go wrong with mine, or was that like self-inflicted by those people? Because if I really fall in love with the sample photos, I don't want to be knitting that and then find out that mine is nothing like that, right? So I tend to pay a lot of attention to other people's project photos. And like, if none of them look like the samples, that's important information, right? I was floored looking through these project photos because all of them look incredible. Like, they all fit perfectly. I believe this pattern has like customized bust sizing that's separate from like the upper bust and the waist, and it just looks so good every single time. So I'm like, oh, I might need to knit this t-shirt. I didn't know I needed a knit baby tee, but I might need this knit baby tee. Also, the fact that it's a baby tee, it's not oversized like the other I'm planning to knit, that would be a relatively quick project. So depending on sort of when in the season I get around to the idea of knitting a t-shirt, maybe I end up squeaking in this one and deciding the other one can wait because this one will happen faster and then I can get to my fall knitting. I don't know. But this is just an idea that's sort of percolating in my head now because I was just so impressed by how good this pattern must be that everyone's shirt turns out this good. So like I said, it does account for separate upper bust and full bust measurements. So as far as size inclusivity, it accommodates up to an upper bust of 57 inches, but that means that it's going to accommodate a full bust of significantly more than that. This pattern costs 10 pounds or about $20 Canadian, and it's also a fingering weight pattern like the other tees, so I'd probably be looking at St. Garden Sunday for this again. And this one is knit top down in the round as a raglan. So TBD if Lydia Morrow is going to convert me into being a knit baby tee kind of person, because I'm thinking about it. Okay, now as promised, I'm going to show you some whip projects on one of these because I have in fact barely started it. So here is the start of my Tucker by Alicia Plummer. So as you can see, it is nothing more than the start of a neckband. I literally cast this on last night. We're not very far yet, but this is when I can show you what I'm doing with that hedgehog fibers yarn that I was telling you about in my last episode. So last time in my acquisitions, I was telling you about the Oh So Fine Merino that I bought from Hedgehog Fibers in the colorways Foam and Down by the River. And I got those to work on this Tucker. And my plan for this is to use these two in a fade, which was entirely inspired / ripped off from one of the knitting podcasts that I love to watch, Sarah Lily Makes. She, a while ago, using a different weight of yarn from Hedgehog Fibers, used these two colorways to do this incredible fade. And I just love it. I've mentioned before, I entirely blame Sarah Lily Makes for getting me into like indie dyed yarn at all, because seeing in particular this project from her was what kind of made me realize, oh, there are some variegated yarns you like with kind of very particular qualities and used in very particular ways. And that project has been floating in my head ever since. And I've finally come up with a way to work this into something that I want to make. So my vision for the Tucker is to do a very similar fade to what she has here, like starting with the foam at the top and ending with Down by the River. It just makes me think of like a Monet painting of a sunrise over his pond. Now, I'm a little bit concerned that the sort of peachy, pinky pasteliness of this at my neck might not be the best on me. I might start it and decide I need to put this color on top, but I also never feel like this is my favorite color on me. So this is one where we're not, we're definitely not picking these colors based on like, oh, what I feel works the best with my skin tone. This is not one of those. I just think it looks like a beautiful painting. But if I do put this on and feel like I look like weirdly naked until it fades into this color, I might have to frog and reevaluate, but we're really hoping that doesn't happen. So I got this yarn in the same special order from Wool & Co. that I got my La Bien-Aimée yarn for the Serendipity. So these cost me $73 US or $105 Canadian. So as you can see, I have not gotten very far with this yet. This is just the very beginning of my neckline. But one of the things that I'm really excited about this project for is that I'm actually doing this as like a 2-person knit along with my friend Lauren, because she happened to have some skeins of Hedgehog Fibers foam in the DK weight base that she kind of had earmarked for a particular project that she just didn't end up liking how it looked in that project. And she was kind of like, what am I going to do with this? And I was like, well, I'm using that color and planning to fade it with this other color to make it look like this. And she was like, ooh. So she went ahead and ordered some Down by the River. And now we're kind of knitting twin projects. And they're not exactly the same. Like I said, she's using DK weight, and so she's following an entirely different pattern than I am. And I believe hers is also just like a t-shirt length sleeve. But I think it's gonna be so fun to work on this kind of at the same time, because we're always texting each other about how our knitting is going anyway. So just the idea that we're kind of knitting the same thing together while we do that is just even better. And we'll also get to kind of compare how the fade looks with my fingering weight versus her DK weight, in part because like one of the funny things about this project is that when Sarah Lily Makes did hers, she was following a pattern from the creator of Hedgehog Fibers, who made a pattern specifically to do this kind of fades that's called, I think, Le Pouf. And the way that that pattern does the fade is that you start out holding 2 strands of your first color, and then you drop 1 strand and bring in a strand of your other color, and then you drop the strand of the first color, and now you're using 2 strands of the second color. So you do the fade by holding multiple strands together, which works because that is a heavier weight project. I can't really do that with a fingering weight pattern using fingering weight yarn. I can only use one strand at a time. And Lauren has the same limitation in that her yarn is a DK weight. She doesn't want to be holding 2 DK weight strands together. So instead of doing a fade with the 2 strands, we're both doing our fade with just like a micro striping approach. And so we'll be able to see how that looks in the fingering weight versus in the DK, which I did test when I did a swatch for this actually. So like I said before, I've previously swatched this fabric on these needles for my Tekla top. So I would not have felt a need to swatch for this project if not for the fade of it all. But so I wanted to kind of do some testing. So what I ended up doing for this swatch was the first 9 rows I did just foam. For the next 9, I did 2 foam, 1 down by the river, 2 foam, 1 down by the river, etc. And then in the middle, I did 50-50, 1 foam, 1 down by the river, repeat. Then the next 9, 2 down by the river, 1 foam, 2 down by the river, 1 foam, etc. And then the very bottom is just down by the river. So I have these 5 different color blocks here, but of course, in an entire garment, these will be more spread out. So there will be larger sections of each individual color block, if that makes sense. But doing the swatch kind of gave me the confidence of like, okay, I like how this fade is looking, even though it's with micro stripes and not like the slightly more subtle blend that you get by holding 2 together. I also did swatch it in the round, which is what all of these dangly bits are, since this top will be knit in the round. And I wanted to make sure that it didn't end up being smaller than anticipated, because like if you're unfamiliar, when you're knitting flat, the way you tend to knit a swatch, you're obviously doing purling rows, and purling rows tend to end up looser than rows that you're knitting. So like when you're knitting in the round, all knit stitches, it ends up being tighter than when you're making half of those rows by purling. So I decided to do my swatch in the round for this one. Another thing that I'm really excited about in doing this with Lauren is that Lauren doesn't have her own knitting podcast, but when I asked her, like, do you want to be involved in this on the channel? Like, that could take whatever form you want if you just want me to share some notes or if you actually want to record something. And she actually was really excited to record something, which I think is so fun because I get to present to you like a little mini Lauren podcast and showing you her project updates alongside mine when I'm showing this project. And one of the things about that I'm really excited about is that obviously when you're watching one person on their channel, I can only share with you my experience in knitting garments the way that I need them to be knit to fit me. So one of the cool things about collaborating with Lauren on this is that she's gonna have a very different experience. And that's gonna enable a comparison that I think is gonna be really both interesting and useful, just as far as like, how much time does it take to do things? How much yarn does it take to do things? What does it cost to do these things? And the way that that can vary so widely, just depending on what you need to fit your body. So I'm really excited to be able to share that perspective on the channel because that's not something that I can do very well just by myself. So I'm super grateful that Lauren wants to be involved in this way and share her side of things with you too. So with that said, meet my friend Lauren.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren and I'm coming to you from kind of cloudy Seattle. And I live here with my beautiful dog, Saga, who's making the curtain move behind me. Say hi, Saga.
I would just like to say you're welcome for the bonus dog content I've arranged for you here. Hope you enjoy.
Who's that dog? It's the Saga show. Oh, hello. You want to show off your little bows? Come here. Come here. Oh, those are your little bows. I'm going to film a thing though. Okay, so I'm wearing my version of the fade tee that Allie and I are making. The only thing that's similar about it is that we're using the same colorways from Hedgehog Fibers.
Me popping in for a sec. So obviously Lauren has gotten significantly further on this than I have.
The backstory to my yarn is that I bought a sweater quantity of yarn for a Lydia Morrow Makes pattern that I got the yarn and decided that wasn't going to be the way it works. And so I bought even more yarn and I'm almost done with that sweater and I'm really, really happy with it. But what I was left with was 3 skeins of Hedgehog Fibers foam, which I'm not a yellow person. And so I was stuck with it and I didn't know what to do with it. And Allie found this amazing fade. One of the really cool things about Hedgehog Fibers is that they really use the same colors in all of their variegated combinations. And so you can really pick out blends that go really well together because it's not just a random blue. They're using the exact same blue dye every time that one comes up. And so yeah, it makes for really cool fades.
I did not know this about Hedgehog Fibers. I just knew that I usually like how their stuff looks and think it's really pretty. This is very cool. Very good to know.
So the pattern I'm making is called the Movement Tee and it's by Lily Kate France. It accommodates up to a bust size 62 inches with 2-inch ease. So technically 64 if you are going for 0 ease. There's some really interesting construction pieces about this, right? She has eyelets. A lot of people love to do eyelets with the raglan because it kind of hides some of the awkwardness, I think, of the seam. I decided not to do that, and it works really well when you have consistent increases. Looks weirder on the side, I will say. So I haven't decided what I'm gonna do about that, but I just left them out and I think it's fine. I think the eyelets look great. I just don't want my bra showing all the time. And what's really interesting about this pattern is that she's very emphatic that you do your upper bust measurement to get the right fit for the raglan so that the armpits hit in the right place. And so I've recently learned about that as a larger chested person. It really, as you can tell, we're gonna get to this a little bit later, it really, really worked for me. Now, my upper bust measurement is about 46 inches and my full bust measurement is 54 inches, and that's pretty big difference. And so if I were doing this entire shirt to my full bust measurements, this raglan would be like all the way down here. So I'm really happy with that. And then the benefit of this pattern as well is that there are optional bust darts. Now, I learned bust darts from sewing. If you haven't done them before, knitting bust darts are really different. They're short rows that go all the way across and just add some volume to the space. With this pattern, I think there are 10 or 11 sizes in this. I'm knitting a size 6, which is the 48 to 50 inch pattern based on upper bust measurements. And then I am doing the optional bust darts. The needle size I'm using for this one is a US 4 or a 3.5 millimeter. I cast this on. I had to go back to my text messages to Allie to see when I really cast this on. I always make my projects in my knitting app before I actually cast them on. I just get so excited. I want to set everything up. I go through and highlight the pattern for my size and redact things that are not relevant to me. So my actual cast on date was March 6th, 2025. And here's where we are. This is 2 skeins, 2 full skeins of Down by the River. Like, yikes. It was not how I envisioned this breaking. Like, not too full. I have this much left of the second one, but I was looking at this going, this is not going to last me the rest of the fade.
Oh yeah, so this is one of the funny things about our fades is that we decided to do them in opposite directions because she really felt like she would like the color Down by the River up by her face more. So if all goes according to plan and I don't end up having to switch mine, in the end we're gonna have funny like inverse twin shirts, which I think is just really funny. And also because she lives in Seattle, if I ever make my way to Flock Fiber Festival, we might have to show up in twinning shirts.
Like this is just one skein and then the second one. And that wasn't how I wanted the color breakdown to look on me. So unfortunately that means there's a third Down by the River skein coming my way. Unfortunately, I always love buying yarn. The problem is I just can't buy one. I have to put other things in my cart, make it worth the free shipping, whatever. So we're kind of at an impasse right now because while I love this level and you know, I got down below the bust darts to make sure that it would fit me well. While I love this fade, we're gonna run out of it pretty quickly. And there's gonna be a lot that's just straight foam, which is fine, but I don't really like yellow that much. The top of my shirt takes so much more fabric than I expected it to that I really have to like calibrate for what the visual outcome is going to be because it's not like an even. I think what I'm going to do is both extend the Down by the River yoke down further and maybe start the fade around here, and then maybe extend some of the fade sections longer. As you can see down here where the stripes are a little bit bigger, this is where the German short rows were for the bust darts. It's really hard to do stripes in bust darts, and so they're stacked 2 over 2 here for the going there and going back and then switching, and that worked out pretty well. You can see kind of where the darts, you know, but I'm not really bothered by that area, but it'll be interesting to see. I'm wondering almost if I should extend Down by the River down to the bust darts. That feels a little far, but then do all of the fade on my stomach because there's a lot of space there. So maybe that's the move. I haven't really decided yet, but the fact of the matter is I am frogging all the way up to here and starting that over when I get my new skein.
Oh god, this is making me stressed about like the prospect of doing my own fade, and like as much as I can kind of try to plan out beforehand, like, okay, how many rows are there? How many rows do I want each of my fade color blocks to take up? Like, I feel like this is one of those things where you don't entirely know until you're doing it if you've put them in the right place. Yeah, I'm a little bit stressed.
This has led to this being a 6 skein project, which is going to be quite a shock if you are used to watching Allie, if you yourself are not someone who is plus size. And that's the thing, right? Like, it just, I have a larger body and it takes more yarn. Things take me longer and they take more time and effort. That is the offset cost of me being able to create clothes that I'm absolutely in love with, that I get to make for me, that I feel like really express who I am as a person. But I think the cost is going to surprise some people. The cost of the pattern was £7.50, which is about $10 USD and about $13 Canadian. The yarn that I'm using is Hedgehog Fibers Merino DK in Down by the River and foam. I bought foam first because I had plans for a different sweater. That was during a 20% off Hedgehog Fibers sale at Wool & Company. So foam cost, with that 20% discount applied for 3 skeins, was about $84 US. All 3 Down by the River skeins were with a 10% promotional discount, but free shipping. So that was about $96. So with the yarn and pattern cost, that's about $180 US, or about $272 Canadian. My new skein should come next week. I really enjoy working with Wool & Company. They've always been really responsive. They tend to have 10% off everyday favorites. The other factor is that I think I only have one local yarn shop in my area that carries Hedgehog, and they're 45 minutes to an hour away from me across town. So I love them. Shout out to the Tea Cozy in Seattle. But y'all are far away. So this is where we are with this. You're seeing it at a stage that it will not be for long because I am going to frog it. But I'm so excited to do this project with Allie. I can't wait to see how it turns out and how different our experiences are. I think it's really interesting and important to have that 2 ends of a pattern spectrum to really get the idea for how knitting works. It's just really cool. So thank you for this opportunity, Allie.
All right, so that's our Lauren update for this week, and I hope we'll get more updates as our projects move along together. All right, that's it for whips, so that means it's finally time to get into the finished object that I've been making you stare at this whole time and not telling you anything about. So this is my finished Colette Pullover by Sari Nordlund. The pattern accommodates up to between a 58 to a 62 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. It costs $6.90 in euros, and I was knitting the size 1 on 4.5 millimeter needles instead of 3.5. So I had to really size up a lot to meet Sari's gauge. It was not even close. No, I'm absolutely obsessed with the color of this. This is the colorway Citrine from the Wandering Flock in both their cotton lino base held double with their silk mohair. So like I said before, this was originally supposed to be knit out of just the cotton lino, and I thought would be perfect for a sort of like summer evening layer kind of piece. And it would have been, I'm sure, if I'd been able to get gauge that didn't look horrible with that. It's definitely no longer like a summer layering piece. It's now definitely just a sweater. But you know what? I had to make a call. I had to decide between whether I was more attached to the idea of a summery garment and preserving that by holding like a linen or something, but in a slightly different color because I couldn't find a good match, and making it sort of a marled effect, or just doubling down on the color and being like, you know what, it's fine if it turns out being a hotter garment. And I went for the color because that's what made me want to buy the yarn in the first place. Like, it was a nice bonus to me that I was like, oh, I can probably knit like a different type of garment than I've knit before. But also, like, really it was the color. I have been thinking about knitting something in like a citrine or a chartreuse color for a really long time, and I just thought this was just the exact perfect version of it. Like, I maintained what I liked about this. Like, when I was ordering this yarn, I had it in my head that I wanted it to be a Colette. I thought the color would be so nice on something that was a very kind of like classic, almost formal looking pattern, but that the color brings something kind of like unexpected and modern to it. And I just feel like it does exactly that. I just love how the color looks. I love how it looks with this pattern, and I will get lots of wear out of it when it is not warm out, which is different than my original plan, but it's still a good plan. So like I said, cost-wise, this one got really out of hand. Like, the cotton lino was okay, it was an investment, like, it's from an indie dyer, right? It's not going to be cheap, but it was fine. It was 134 Canadian, and then I got hit with $55 in UPS fees, which, like, don't love that. Then I had to buy mohair, and of course the mohair that matched it a million times better than any other mohair options were the exact color match, also from the Wandering Flock. So more indie dyed, now it's mohair, now it's even more expensive. So my grand total project cost on this one between pattern and yarn was $363 Canadian or $253 US, which is very painful. But hopefully I get a lot of use out of it. Anyway, so this pattern from Sari Nordlund, this is knit top down in the round mostly, but you do start by knitting a little sort of trapezoid shape for your back, and you knit the 2 sides of the front before you join, like at the underarm in the round, and then you're knitting in the round from there. I do really love how this worked out for the neckline. Like, you get that nice shaping at the back of the neck without having to do any short rows. The front of the neck is nice and dropped down from the back, so there's no sort of like choking. I'm also very happy with myself when I tacked down this double folded neckband. I think the pattern tells you to like sew it with a whip stitch or something. I didn't want to do that. Whenever I'm tacking down my neckbands, I just do it by like picking up a stitch from the inside and like knitting two together as I go around. But when I did this time, I had the foresight to do that with a much bigger needle so that it wouldn't cinch this in too much. And the result is that I have this really comfortable, kind of wider than I tend to end up with neck on the sweaters. It's just a nice change of pace. So I cast this project on initially December 26th. So like I finished my sister's cardigan. This was my next cast on. But like I said, I was really not happy with how my gauge was looking. So I worked on it for a couple days and was like, I'm not sold. I don't know. I need to think about it. And that's when I kind of abandoned ship as far as all winter knitting plans. Ordered some yarn and cast on my Lyon sweater. So that was when I sort of went rogue. And then I finished that just in time to bring it on my trip with me last month to Peru. So in the like 2 days while that was blocking, I was getting this recast on now that I had my mohair to add in to have something to work on during that trip. So I just sort of had like the start of the trapezoid back piece when I like got on a plane. And then I think by the time I was coming home, I had most of the body done. I think I had maybe one more cable repeat to do on the body, but I paused that to do the sleeves because I knew I was going to be dealing with like a yarn chickeny situation here because when I bought the yarn, this was a project I had in mind. I had been looking at the yarn suggestions and thought that I bought enough yarn. Then I start to hear, often the Sari Nordlund yarn estimates really undershoot, supposedly because I guess pattern testers aren't always required to like finish the project in time for the test deadline. So the numbers are just kind of estimates and not proven necessarily from people's projects sometimes. And I went, oh no. And because this is one where like I feel like I've largely learned by now to order one more skein of yarn than I think I'm going to need because I tend to need it. But this was a case where it seemed like I should be fine within the range just based on like what 3 skeins of the cotton lino was going to get me and what the pattern was recommending. And the fact that it was just like expensive indie dyed yarn. And I was like, the difference between buying 3 and 4 of these is dramatic. Like these are big skeins, right? So it's not like just buying one more little ball of knitting for olive merino or something. So I was like, it's fine. 3 will be fine. And then it kind of became a whole thing. So in my last update, I had done the number of repetitions of the cable pattern for the body that the pattern tells you to do, but I had paused there and my plan was to knit sleeves from there so that I would know how much yarn my sleeves were using, to know like, do I have more yarn to make my body longer if I want to? What are my options? What do I have available? And I had also, in thinking about the potential of yarn chicken, I had made peace with the idea that the sweater might need to have 3/4 length sleeves, or even looking at the project photos, I realized it's actually intended to be like a sort of bracelet length sleeve. Like these sleeves on Sari do not look the way I tend to do my sleeves. So like my sleeves, I tend to have them like to my knuckles. Like I just love like a long cozy sleeve. But at the same time, this is sort of a dressier style of pattern. Like I said before, I like the sort of like traditional ornateness of it mixed with the bold color. So I think that stylistically, like in her photos, I don't think the sleeves look too short. I just have a thing where like, because I'm not super tall, but I'm relatively tall. Like I'm 5'8". And so like in the scheme of buying women's clothing from stores, like my whole life, my sleeves have always been too short on like everything. Like I'm very used to rolling up my sleeves because that's just the only way my sleeves don't look too short most of the time. So I have a very hard time seeing a bracelet length sleeve on me and not just reading it as the sleeve's too short. Like it's just so ingrained in me because that's usually what it was. Like it would happen on things that obviously aren't supposed to have a bracelet length sleeve, like a baggy hoodie, you know? So it's just like deeply encoded that if it comes to here, it's too short. So like spoiler, we basically have bracelet length sleeves here. And so this is a thing where sometimes I'm wearing the sleeves rolled up and sometimes I am trying to slowly exposure therapy myself into not thinking that the sleeves look like the wrong length. And I'll stand up in a minute so you can get a better look. But because when I look at it on Sari, I'm like, that looks fantastic. And sometimes I can look at it like that on myself and think that looks like it's supposed to be that way. And sometimes I'm like, your sleeve is just too short like it always is. So this is sort of like a little bit of a mental hurdle for me, I think. But I do think that in the scheme of particularly sweaters that are meant to be a little bit dressier, I do think that it's probably a hurdle that is like worth surmounting because I do like how it looks on other people. I do think that it looks nice and does make it feel a little bit dressier. So I'm interested in the concept. I just struggle with it on me, but our yarn chicken situation has sort of forced us into a chance to rehabilitate my relationship with the idea of bracelet sleeves. because like working on the sleeves, I was weighing my yarn ball. I was like, okay, how much yarn does one repeat of this sleeve take me? Okay, based off of that, what do I have enough yarn left for? And it became clear to me that, so this sleeve is the number of cable repeats that the pattern recommends that you do. It tells you to do 3. And it was becoming clear to me as I was knitting this, that to get a full length sleeve like the way that I would normally knit it, I would at least need to do another full repeat, if not 1.5. Like just a half would not have cut it. It seemed like I should have enough yarn to do another half, but probably not more than that, maybe a full, but even that I wasn't confident would be enough once the sleeves have kind of like shrunken up a bit with wear, as I find that they tend to. And I decided that it seemed like a better use of the extra yarn that I had after doing just the 3 cable repeats would be to just use it on the ribbing of the body and just knit the ribbing a little bit longer than the pattern recommends, because I was also feeling like the body was a little bit shorter than I wanted, but again, not enough that I wanted to do another full cable repeat. Didn't have enough yarn for another full cable repeat anyway. And I just really prefer how the garment looks when you cut off the cable repeat actually at the end, like with this little row of eyelets, rather than starting that ribbing right in the middle of a cable, which the pattern tells you you can do either, just depending on where, like what length you need to stop it at, but it just looks so much better after the eyelets. So I was like, you know what, we're gonna preserve that. We're just gonna do some extra long ribbing with whatever yarn we end up with. And let me get up so you can see how it all turned out. Ta-da! The color's just so good, isn't it so good? So here's where we ended up with for the length of the body, so this ribbing is a little bit longer than it was recommended. I think it was supposed to be maybe 1 3/4 inches, and I think it ended up closer to 3. And I am really happy with how this length turned out. It was feeling just a little bit too short to me where it was like recommended to be, so that feels nice and comfortable. And this is where we're at for the sleeves. So like in terms of the diva bracelet length, like, okay, we can see my watch. Like I get it. I get the concept. I feel like if I take myself out of my own brain and like try to imagine that looking at me is me looking at a person who's not me, I think I like it. It's just that when I am me in my own head, I'm like, your sleeves are too short again. So that's my journey. But I think that it definitely turned out to be a different sweater than I imagined. Like I said, I was imagining it would be something much lighter weight, much more summery, like as the sun comes in here. I'm getting warm. I'm definitely not like, ooh, I should throw this on in July when there's a breeze. But I am like, wow, I love this. Like, it's just so pretty. It has a nice sort of loose drapiness to it. The gauge is definitely still more open than like the average sweater that I worked on, but it does feel like, looking at Sari's pictures, I feel like my gauge looks like her gauge does, and despite the fact that it's a little bit open, the mohair kind of fills it in nicely, so it feels deliberately open, unlike my test gauge when I just had my cotton lino, where it felt like you did something weird here, this looks wrong. So I'm very happy with how the fabric turned out. It's really nice and soft. The silk mohair is really nice. Granted, I'm not a person who's generally sensitive to mohair, so I can't really weigh in on that front, but big fan. Could also do a little like front tuck if I want to be super millennial about it. I just really love it. I also feel like, do I have a dress I could layer this over? I feel like this would be really cute layered over a dress, but do I have one that would coordinate? TBD. Okay, so more thoughts from working on this one. In doing the sleeves, I was a little bit iffy when I started following the sleeve directions because the number of stitches that it tells you to pick up for your sleeve, I think because the cable repeat is many stitches wide, just as like a percentage of a sleeve, the number of stitches that it tells you to cast on for size 1 is a lot less than it tells you to cast on for like the next several sizes all have the same number of stitches, and it's a lot more stitches. And I looked at it and was like, should I just be casting on the size 2 sleeve? Like I tend to end up picking up more stitches than a pattern tells me to when I'm picking up for a sleeve anyway, just for it to feel like I've thoroughly picked up all the way around, and then I will just decrease in the next round to whatever I need to get the right number. But I was like, should I just be keeping all the stitches I pick up and just trying to get to that number and just knitting that? Because the size 1 number seems really small. Like this just feels like a narrow, like is this just gonna be like too tight of an arm? And in a world where I did not know I was going to be playing yarn chicken, I would have just done the size 2 arm. And the size 1 arm is fine. Like I don't feel like this is too tight. I do feel like the size 2 would have gotten it a little bit further away from my armpit, which would just be nice as far as like how much washing the garment's gonna need, but like it's perfectly comfortable to wear. And again, I did not have extra yarn to waste on a whole extra cable repeat going around the arm. But the thing that I think I would do differently, because it wouldn't take a lot of extra yarn, is that on the underside of the sleeve, let me see if I can show you this. On the underside, there are decreases happening. And of course, when you start decreasing where you have cables involved, the cable's gonna stop cabling, right? So like at the very beginning, it's full cable width, but almost right away, it starts becoming too narrow. So even as there's cables going all around the arm, there's this little strip of non-cable going all the way up the arm that just gets more narrow as you get closer to the wrist. And like, I don't know that I think the sleeve needed decreases, in part because it's also not very many. Like, you do so few. You do considerably more decreases on the sleeves in every other size. Like I said, where there's just the really big jump between how many you cast on from size 1 to size like 2+. The way that that gets evened out, because obviously size 2 shouldn't have a much bigger sleeve than size 1, it's just that size 1 you do a lot less decreasing than size 2. So given how little decreasing there is, I don't really feel like it was worth breaking up the cable repeat for. Like, it would be nice if it just went all the way around, and I don't feel like the sleeve would have been too big because it decreases by so little anyway. But just by the time I'd sort of realized this, I was already a few decreases deep and like past where a cable twist should have been. I would have had to like start the sleeve entirely over again to change this, which I decided I didn't want to do. And I was like, well, I should probably conserve all the yarn I can anyway. But that's just a little like, just if you decide to knit this, and if you're knitting the size 1 in particular, just maybe consider not doing the decreases on your sleeve if you don't feel like you would notice a decrease difference of like that much and would rather just have full cables all the way around. And in terms of yarn, in the end, I ended up with mohair left over, which I knew I was going to because it came in just, I had to buy the same number of skeins, but it was going to get me like more yardage in the mohair than the cotton lino. So I have this mohair left plus these 2 little balls in this bag, which this is my beautiful yarn management strategy. I was finding that the sleeves were super annoying in terms of yarn management. And with my Lyon sweater, I was like, oh my God, I'm so smart. Because you're dealing with stripes, right? There's a lot of balls of yarn going on when you, like me, like to knit your sleeves 2 at a time. But I found, oh, I can just like tuck these little balls of yarn like down inside the sleeve when I'm not working on it. And that kind of keeps it contained and out of the way of the other sleeve. And I was like, look at me, I'm so genius, this is so smart, this is so perfect. And I was like, I will just do that with this one too. And it did not work that way, because when I was doing the sleeves, first of all, I was having issues with my ball winder. I think it needs oil and I can't find it. But so I had to ball up the yarn by hand, which meant that it was in like actual balls rather than cakes like this one. And I think those are just more like dense, and they're also more just like round. They don't have the kind of extra width you tend to get in a cake. So they just were not staying in the sleeves. They were just constantly like falling out through the body and getting tangled with each other. And because one strand is mohair, it's like doing the thing where it kind of like fuzz fuses onto something and you can't even tell, like, is it actually twisted around or has the fuzz just clung on? It was very annoying. So the solution I landed on was a Ziploc bag folded in half widthwise and then taped so that all of the yarn still traveled together. Like, I didn't have one sleeve's yarn balls flopping off to this side and one flopping off to that side. They travel together, but separately. So like one half of the bag was like a ball of mohair and a ball of cotton lino. And the other side was a ball of mohair and a ball of cotton lino. So if things got twisted one over the other, I'd had to like flip the bag over a couple times to like fix it, you know? So that was my beautiful yarn management strategy. It was not glamorous, it did work. So like I said, I was knitting the sleeves 2 at a time, and last time I was saying maybe I will reattempt 2 at a time on 2 separate circulars, where like you sort of have one circular that's doing the back of both sleeves and one that's doing the front of both sleeves. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will link in the description a tutorial for how this works, rather than doing both of them on magic loop, because I don't know, like I usually do magic loop. Sometimes I get annoyed with magic loop that I feel like I'm just doing a lot of like scooching stitches around to get everything into place. I had tried the 2 separate circulars once last year for a pair of socks for my dad and partly liked it. I felt like I was doing a bit less shoving stitches around, but I also did many times just accidentally magic loop it, like just use the wrong needle and then suddenly everything's back on one needle again. And I was just sort of undecided. So I was like, okay, maybe this time I'll try it again. So I did do that, and I got quite a ways into it before I accidentally got them all back on one circular. But then once I'd done that once, I kind of kept accidentally doing it again, like not every row, but like every few. Like I ended up doing it a few times, and eventually was like, okay, I'm just gonna go back to one needle, in part because by that point I had done enough of it, like when I was doing it without making this mistake, that I just felt like, okay, I feel like I'm doing a bit less scooching around of stitches. But I feel like I have learned how to mitigate that in part by using a smaller needle on the left when I'm working 2 at a time on a circular. So things just scooch around more easily, and it's only your right needle size that actually matters as far as your gauge anyway. So having the left one just a size or 2 smaller just helps everything move a bit faster. So that was just annoying me less lately anyway. And then I was finding that with the 2 sets of circulars, whatever one I wasn't working on was just kind of like flopping in a way that just annoyed me. And sometimes I'd have to like flick out of the way. It would like flop onto my hand. I was just not finding it better. So by the like 5th time it all ended up on one needle, I was like, it's just going to be on one needle. That's just what it's going to be. That's fine. This is what works for me. I feel like I have tried something else. I did it. I tested the other option. I tried it out. It was not for me. And now I can confidently proceed with the version that I like best. So we can close the door, I think, on that particular experiment. Now, a couple of pointers for both my future self and you, if you are also doing 2 at a time on Magic Loop, or I mean, in one of these cases, just anything on Magic Loop. 2 things that I noticed this time that I would like to remember for next time. Number 1, if your stitch pattern involves any sort of ribbing, which I'm counting this as, like these cables, in every row except the cabling rows, like it's just a wide rib, right? When you're splitting your stitches in half between the front and the back needle on Magic Loop, always end it after a purl stitch, before a knit stitch, because I found, and I think I've realized this like multiple times and keep like forgetting the details of it and forgetting to implement it. If your first stitch after you turn your needles around is a purl stitch, I think just because purl stitches are just looser, there's just a bit more yarn there than a knit stitch typically, that makes you a lot more susceptible to getting the ladders that you can get from Magic Loop. And let me show you exactly how I know this. So on this sleeve, I had this divided, ending after a purl stitch and picking up on the other side with a knit stitch on both sides. This cuff is basically perfect. Like there's no noticeable laddering anywhere. This cuff, there it is. So this is where you can see toward the bottom, I initially had this breaking after a knit stitch before a purl stitch. And that's where you get this really weird, wonky, wide knit stitch. And here you can see where I realized this and I fixed it. I adjusted where the stitch is split. And suddenly, my ribbing is perfect again. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you will just get a much cleaner rib. You will get less awkward gapping in your Magic Loop if you make sure that you break it after a purl before a knit, not the other way around. Also, if you're in the middle of a project that you have set up 2 at a time on Magic Loop and you're like, okay, that's great, but like the spot where I need to fix that is the spot that's like in the middle of these 2 needles. So like, it's not just at one end where I can just scoot it onto the other needle, like it's so far away from where the needles change. I figured out that the way that I could fix this was by using a locking stitch marker, picking up that stitch with a locking stitch marker, that I could take it off of its needle without it just getting lost. And then when I worked my way back around to that spot with the other needle, I could then pick up that stitch with the needle that it's actually supposed to be on and go from there. So it's now where it's supposed to be. So hopefully if you need to like taxi a stitch from one needle to the other, hopefully that can help you. So in the end, in terms of my yarn, I used like every last inch of cotton lino that I had, including my swatch. I used it like a ball of yarn. Like I just undid the knot and connected that and just pulled from it and watched it frog itself as I knit from it. Like this sweater was like cannibalizing itself. So that's it. I think that's everything that I have to tell you about my Colette, which I feel like it's been a work in progress, like in degrees for a long time. Like I think, didn't this initially make an appearance in my fall knitting plans? I think it might have, not as a concrete plan, but as like a, that would be nice, maybe. Like I think this has been floating around for a long time. And then I ordered that cotton lino quite a while ago. So I'm really excited to finally have this one in my wardrobe. All right, that's all the knitting updates I've got for you today. As far as our off the needle segment, I think I'm gonna hold off on a book talk until next time because we're already running really long today. My mouth is dry. But I do wanna do a bit of the little mini segment that I introduced last time to support Canadian small businesses right now. So in thinking about what I might wanna shout out this time, it occurred to me that there are things that you see me wear on this channel, like literally every single video, that maybe I should mention. So let's talk about jewelry. So you might notice every time I'm like holding yarn up to the camera, these rings that I wear, these are from an Etsy shop that's based in BC, and they are 10 karat solid gold. So my sort of MO for jewelry is that I want jewelry that I can put on and just like never think about again. I just wear it every single day and I don't have to take it off to shower. Like I prefer to buy something that is good quality one time and then just never have to think about it. So because these rings are solid gold, it means that even as a ring sort of inevitably gets scraped on things over time, it's gold all the way down. So there's not like a plating that's gonna get worn off. So the price on these varies a little bit just depending on what size of ring you're ordering. So they range from $70 to $100 Canadian, which is about $50 to $70 US. I've had these for 3 solid years now and they still look absolutely perfect. So that's the kind of like criteria that I shop for jewelry with, where like I spend a little bit more upfront to know it's gonna last. So I'll put a link to this Etsy shop in the description below. I'll also shout out the earrings. I'm always wearing these little gold huggy hoops. These are also from an Etsy shop. This one's in Ontario. And these ones are 14K gold filled, which is not the same as solid gold. It's less gold than a solid gold, but it's significantly more gold than gold plated, which is sort of the like lowest quality version of jewelry that involves gold. But the plating on gold plated is really thin. So it can and usually does over time wear off, whereas gold filled has a much thicker casing of gold around it. So it really does hold up to the elements. Like these I've had for 4 years. Again, I have basically not taken them off. I only take them off if I'm wearing like statement earrings on a particular day. And then these ones go right back in. So they're there through showering, swimming, ocean, everything. And they're a bit more affordable since they're gold filled rather than solid gold. And earrings don't really get the same like wear and tear that rings do. Like they're not like smacking on things constantly. So I feel like gold filled is a good kind of balance of affordability and durability for earrings. So these ones cost $35 Canadian, which is only about $25 US. And I have these in the 14mm size. And again, I've worn these every day for 4 years and they're perfect. The last one I want to mention is my necklace that I'm always wearing. And this exact one is not available anymore, but I did find a very similar necklace from another Etsy jewelry shop that's based in BC, and it's gold filled just like the earrings are. So it's $60 Canadian or about $40 US. And again, I will drop links to all these things in the description below if you're curious in checking them out. Okay, that was a long episode. I have been sitting here recording for a long time, so I would love to know what your spring knitting plans are if you have any, and if you'd like to be here next time, I hope you'll consider subscribing if you're not already. If you already are though, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time.